CSIS 2440 is filmed before a live studio audience.
So today, loops and branches. What's a loop? What's a branch? Okay, a loop is just what it sounds like. It's a loop, right? You're going to loop through some code multiple times. Right now, we touched on it on day one, right? We touched on the fact that there's if statements and there's loops and there's different types of loops, and we covered that briefly. But remember what I told you. Day one was a day where I just threw a bunch of stuff at you and hoped some of it just kind of sunk in a little bit. It wasn't meant to teach anything. It was just to kind of expose you to a bunch of stuff. Now we're going to take a little bit more time and walk through these. So we're going to take a tangent from the palindrome site, right? We started that last time. We'll pick that back up next time. But today we're going to set some foundations, some basic programming ideas. And so loops and branches, I'll kind of keep a little whiteboard thing over here. Loops and branches. All right, we're going to start with branches, but just loops and branches flows better than saying branches and loops, right? But we're going to start with branches, okay? What is a branch, just in general? Forget about code. What's a branch? There's a bunch of them out there on those trees. Right there. Right. It's just like it sounds, right?
We're sitting here calling, what's a branch?
Okay. Yep, that's exactly right. Yeah, that's the programming version, right? So think of it like a fork in the road, right? You're walking and you see a split in the road, you can go that way or that way. That's all that we're talking about here, right? And sometimes the fork is just two things. Sometimes it can be 100 things, right? And so depending on what happens, we determine where we go. So there's a couple different ones. We're going to start with the if, then we're going to do the if else, and then we're going to do the if else, and then we're going to do the switch. Those are the branches in PHP, but let's start simple, okay? Now this is going to be weird. I have not taught you guys how to get user input yet, and I'm not going to today. And we're not going to take user input. We're going to fake that part. We're going to pretend. Okay, so put on your imagination hats or whatever, right? And we're going to pretend like we're getting user input, because user input it's not hard, but it's complex. It's intricate, and I don't want to go off on that, and that's a whole separate thing. We need to learn a little bit more of the foundations of PHP before we get there. But we'll get there eventually. But for now, we're just going to pretend. Also, because this is just for demonstration purposes and it's not going to be a real website, I'm not going to bother putting all the HTML tags in there. All right, it's just going to be plain, just some raw PHP, all right? Which is just going to generate raw text, not actual HTML. Okay, first thing we're going to do is you would get user input. So we're going to have someday we'll have user input code here. We're just going to fake it for now and say that the user input is whatever. We'll fill that in as we go along, okay? But line 2 would be some code that would put a web form on the page, they'd click the submit button, we'd grab the value, and then we'd dump it into this variable called user input. Okay, simple enough? All right, so now we're going to have an output here. We're just going to say echo, and we'll do it as a paragraph, and we'll say, what is Jeff's favorite band? Sorry folks, it's all about me today. All right. Okay, what's his favorite band? All right. Then we're going to get the user input, so this will actually occur up here. And then we'll get the user input and we'll put the value right here. We'll fill that out in a minute as if the user guessed something, all right? So if user input, if it's equal to Metallica, then we're going to do something. Now there's already something wrong with my statement here. Does anybody know? I just assigned, what I just did on line 7 was said, I'm setting the value of user input to be equal to Metallica. This is the assignment operator, not the comparison operator, where I'm asking if they're equal to each other, right? If you've got a Java background, this is what you do with numbers. You can't do this with strings. In PHP, you can do it with strings, okay? And if you're familiar with the JavaScript variation, same thing. How's this feel so far, right? Simple enough, okay. What we're going to do is just simply say this. If they guess Metallica, we're going to say, good job. That's it. I should probably put an HTML tag around that. But again, for the sake of speed during the class, we're going to leave it off. Okay. So now we would run this program. Now, obviously, watch what happens when I run it. It's not very useful here. It just asks that question. It doesn't even give me a place to enter the data. The user would enter a value, and let's say that they said it's Metallica. And that's what gets put into user input, and then the page would refresh, and it says, good job, you guessed it. That's a simple branch. you would go one way or the other way. Now what happens if they don't put Metallica? They put metallic, nothing happens. The end, right? That's a simple branch. So the first part, I think you understand the basic idea, obviously. I want to make sure we understand the syntax. Okay, with the syntax here, remember, all we're doing is taking some value and we're comparing it to some other value. So I'm taking metallic and comparing it to Metallica. If it matches, it's going to say good job. If it doesn't, nothing happens. Notice that's not a very good user experience, right? They entered something that's not Metallica and nothing happened. That's going to throw them off, right? So maybe we should say, oh, if they didn't put Metallica, then we can say this, echo, boo. So now when we refresh, at least there is some feedback. So that way we know, right? We know what's going on here and we got some feedback from the user. Okay, well, that's a start, but this can get more intricate, right? For example, maybe if they guessed Megadeth, we want to say, oh, you were close, right? But this is the first one here. We started with just an if, and it just does one thing. This is an if else, and it does two things, okay? In this case, we can go further. Let's say they enter Metallica. We're like, great, good job. But what if they said Megadeth? We want to give them a different response. Something like that, right? And I will neither confirm nor deny if any of this is true. It's hard to pick between Metallica and Megadeth. I mean, come on. Okay, else. So what's going on here? Before we run the code, this is saying if they put this in, then do this. But if they didn't, ask, well, did they put this in? Okay, if they did, put this. If they didn't, say, okay, well, then do this. You can have an infinite number of else ifs. You can have as many as you want, and that means 0. You could have 0 else ifs. But this gives us a second branch here. So now it's still going to say nope in this case because I changed it to say nope. But if we said Megadeth, now it says so close to number 2. And if we put Metallica, it'll still say good job and so forth. Okay, easy enough? Let's do one more. All right, but look what's happening here. This can get pretty complex here, but it's simple. If this occurs, do what's on line 9. If it didn't occur, oh, did this occur? If that didn't occur, oh, did this occur? If that didn't occur, okay, just run the default. Easy enough, okay? Run it, and we'll put in here maiden. That's it, okay? Good? Questions on the basic syntax there? Yeah? All right. Remember, you can do infinite else ifs, and if statements can be no else's at all. Just if this occurs, then do this one little thing and move on. Or you can do as many else ifs as you want, but the rule with else's, just else, not else if, but just else. The rule with else is it's either 0 or 1, nothing else. You cannot have multiple else's. You can have multiple else ifs, because think about that. If I say if else, well, that's a binary decision. Either it's this or it's that. The else if makes it to where it can be a ternary or a quadrary or whatever you want to call it, right? Okay, and as many choices as you want. Now, a note about this. Notice all of my curly braces here. In this scenario, it is not necessary to have any curly braces because each thing in the curly braces is only one thing. So in the event that there's only one thing in the curly braces, they're not necessary. It can be confusing. It can be very confusing. So let me show it to you. Let me copy this so I don't lose it here. This is legal. This is totally legitimate. All right, so let's run it just to prove that. And there you go. It still says they're also number 2. We'll change this to be Metallica, and it says good job, and so forth. It still works, okay? So this is legal. Also, so is this. So exactly, yeah. What he said was this is a little bit better than just doing it with one line beneath it. So there's pros and cons to all of this. I like this because it's clean. It's pretty easy to look at, and it's pretty straightforward to read. In fact, even if I were using curly braces, in this scenario, I would do it this way, okay? Let's talk about some advantages and disadvantages, though. Thing number 1, curly braces. If you know it's one line and it's always one line, it's one less thing to type. Because whenever I do an if statement, let's just start a new one up here. I always go if, parentheses, put whatever in the parentheses, enter, and then my 2 fingers, my index finger and my middle finger on my right hand go right to those 2 bracket keys. My left hand goes on the shift key and I go dun dun, like They're not like that. I've hit the two of them together, then I back up with my arrow, and then I hit enter to give me some space to type. That's how I do it every time. And you get in the rhythm of that. It's pretty quick, obviously. This is how I do it. Well, if I don't have to type those curly braces, it saves me a little bit of time. And it's not a lot, but it helps. Every little bit helps. All right, other than that though, when you're here, again, I think this is pretty easy to read. And some people like the other format where it's just one line below. Technically though, this entire thing is one statement. It's just one statement, right? The else if is part of this if. This else if is part of this if, and this else is part of this. Is all one block of code. Here's one of the disadvantages, and this happens to me all the time. I do this all the time, which you would think would make me stop leaving off my curly braces, but it doesn't. What if I decide I'm going to say echo good job, and then I'm going to do something else too, and who knows what? Something else, right? I don't know. Suddenly I have a problem because that's two things and I need curly braces for that to work, right? Now, obviously, if I were just going to add something else, I would just put it inside these same quotes, but this could be, it doesn't have to be an echo. It could be anything. Run some other, call another function, who knows what. But the point is, this, if I get Metallica correct, which it's right now, that's the user's input, Metallica, it's not going to echo out to something else. I'm going to get an error, right? Because it's what I've done. Here's what I've really done. Let's go back to this. And what I've done is right here essentially said echo something else. Look what's happening there. That's when I do it this way, it's clear why that's wrong, right? Just in the middle of a big if-else statement, I've just put some stuff in there that you can't really do, right? Does that make sense? Okay, so that's no good. So this is another reason why doing curly braces is safer, because now if I put that extra piece in here, it makes perfect sense, right? And now it'll work, okay? All right, how do we feel about that? Good? Questions? Okay, let's look at the other type of branch. This is called a switch. The reason it's called a switch is I'm going to actually find the YouTube video that will demonstrate this for you. Take a look at this train right here, this train track. So imagine the train's coming from right here straight and it hits this break in the track. What do we expect to happen? The wheels they sit on top of the railing, and it looks like the wheel on the left is going to go straight because it's going to pass right through this little gap here. And the wheel on the right, from what I can tell, it looks like it's going to go straight. But in a moment, see this little box right here? This is a solenoid box. Back in the day, there was a huge lever there, like in the 1800s, when 1850s, whatever, when trains were big, 1880s, whatever that was. When they first became a thing, I should say, there was a big lever there, and either there'd be somebody stationed there, that was their job to move the track, or the train engineer would have to stop the train, get out, move the lever to adjust the track. But that lever is just a big switch. That's what it's called, a switch, right? So watch what happens. It's going to operate automatically in this particular one. So now I shift it over. Now I think it's pretty clear that it's going to go to the right. But you can see what happens when it gets here. This wheel is going to follow this path right here, and this other wheel is going to follow this path right here, and it's going to turn. So it's just called a switch track, right? That's what they're called. And that's where they got the name from. In programming, they do that all the time. Radio buttons are named after the old style of buttons on a car radio back in the day, right? Anyway, so that's a nice visual aid to show you what a switch is all about. But it's just like an if statement, right? This now, a switch statement is actually closer to an if, else, if, bunch of else ifs, right? Anyway, let's take a look at that and see how it works in the code. So we're going to leave that down below just as a little reference here. And what you do is you say switch, and you're going to be switching on some variable, okay? What do you suppose the variable is that we're switching on? Yes, user input. So we're going to switch on this, and we're going to have multiple cases. And we call them case whatever the name that we're looking to match. So case Metallica. Whatever goes after this is what happens when they choose Metallica and so forth down the line, okay? So what's our default? Nope. Exactly right. Nope. Okay? Nope. Let's get rid of that one. What is it if they say Maiden? It's this one right here. So we'll just put that right there. And if they say Megadeth, we do this one. Oh, I did it backwards, but that's all right. We'll just put it that way. Doesn't matter. Close enough, right? And then we'll do good job here. We'll talk about this extra something else here in just a minute. But look at that switch statement. Man, that's clean.
Fresh and clean as a whistle. That's Irish Spring.
Now there is one issue here we'll talk about in a second. Right now, the way it's set, if they put Megadeth or Metallica or Maiden, it will say nope. Well, it'll say nope, right? Does anybody know why? Yes, we need a break in there. Let's talk about why that is, okay? Let's run it. I want to prove this to you, right? Right now, it says Metallica, right? So it should say good job, but it does not. It actually says all of them, okay? It says all of them, but it eventually says nope. I said it was only going to say nope. I should have said it's going to say them all. The reason I said it only would say nope is because normally I don't actually echo it out. I assign it to a variable, right? I'll say something like output equals good job. This is how I normally do this. And then down here after the switch, I say echo output. See what I'm saying? Yeah. That's normally what I do. That's why a minute ago I said it was only going to say nope because my brain was in that mode. Anyway, so now it's only going to say nope, right? Because here's what happens here. The way these run, these little case statements, they're just labels. This is actually a throwback to the programming back in the 60s. They're just labels. And you could label something, and it was very common in that kind of coding to say, go to Metallica or whatever the label was called. And it would just skip down to that part of the code and it would run it, okay? That's a very common thing. So what's happening here is if the user input is Metallica, it goes right here, and then it runs everything from here down. It runs everything, okay? This is not code, it's just a label. So it just ignores that. It goes to Metallica because that's the user input, and then it runs everything, every single line of code all the way to the end. And so all we've done all the way through is we've assigned output to good job and then immediately reassigned it to that, then immediately reassigned it to that, and then immediately reassigned it to that. Dig it? Dig 'em. So if they say Metallica, we need to break, and then we're done. We break out of the switch statement. Now it'll work properly, but if they put Megadeth, it's still going to do the same thing. So we've got to put a break and another break. Notice the lack of curly braces here on each of the switch statements. We don't need it there, I guess. Notice there's no curly braces here. You don't need them because this label is just labeling everything. So sometimes I will do it this way. Sometimes I'll do that and you'll see the case statements, multiple lines like that. But when it's small enough like this, just leave it on one line. But now it'll work just fine. Good job. Or if we change it to stand by, I'm going to make this a little easier on us in the future. So if I change it to Maiden, it does what it's supposed to do. How are we feeling about all that? Good? Okay. Could I put curly braces right here? Yeah, curly braces, you can put them anywhere. Like I'll put some right here. Why not? That doesn't change anything, right? I just refreshed it, nothing changed. Curly braces are meant to block out code. They're only required in certain scenarios. They're required when you're trying to keep them as part of a bigger statement, like an if statement or a function or something like that, or a loop, which we'll look at that in just a few minutes. All right, so let's look at a loop here. What's a loop do? Loops does just what it sounds like. It loops through your code and runs it multiple times. So down here in the loop section, we have a while loop, a do while loop, and if we want to get technical, we should be doing this. For loop, and we also have a for each loop, which we're not going to cover today. That one comes in handy when we're dealing with arrays, which we'll talk about next time we meet. But these three we'll look at right now, okay? The short version, the big difference between these three here, a for loop is designed for when you want to iterate a specific number of times. I want to run this block of code 7 times or 12 times or whatever. A while loop is just, you want to just keep looping until something changes and you specify what that something is. The do while loop, the big difference there is you always run the code once. And then you may or may not continue running it depending on if things change or not, okay? So let's take a look at a for loop because they're the trickiest ones to wrap your head around. So let's clear out, I think we can get rid of all of this here. We'll maybe use this input thing, maybe not. So a for loop has 3 components to it, okay? And this first part is the actual counter, and this is not code here. The second part is the comparison. And then the third part is the increment or the decrement, okay? Increment means increase, decrement means decrease. You can increase it by 1, by 2s, by 4s, by 20 at a time, whatever you want. We'll show how to do all of those. Then what we want is what happens when the conditions are still satisfied that you're supposed to run the loop, all right? So let's start off. The very first thing that happens, you set a counter. Back in the day, this is how we made for loops. And I'm only showing you this because I like the structure, but it helps maybe it'll help you understand this. For x equals 1 to 10. That's how you make a for loop back in the day. And like BASIC uses that structure and some other languages do. That means loop from 1 to 10. That's what it means. Count from 1 to 10. When you're done counting, stop running the code. Okay? That's why I use an x as my variable. So I set x right here equal to 0. That's where I'm going to start my counter. You can start it wherever you want. We'll talk about different places to start it in the future, but for now we'll just start at 0. Now I'm going to say, as long as x is less than 9, we'll go with that, keep going. Last, we're going to increment x by 1, which is saying x equals whatever it is plus 1. Right? X equals x plus 1. That means take whatever values of x is, add 1 to it, and then take that new value and assign it to x again. Okay? The shortcut, you guys probably know, x plus plus. It means exactly the same thing. So now what I want to do is I just want to do something 10 times, 0 to 9, right? Well, whatever. I can just say echo something. And I'm going to put that as a paragraph so that it'll line break in between each one, like that. This is a simple idea, but we refresh it, and it just says something 10 paragraphs, right? If I look at the code, it's just, that's the raw HTML. It's just 10 paragraphs, right? That's it. Okay, and that's all that is delivered up to the browser, is that raw code that was created on the server. Easy enough, though. That's a really easy way to print out 10 paragraphs. Now, obviously, printing out 10 paragraphs that just say, quote, something is kind of silly. But maybe you're accessing a database, and you want to loop through all of the records, and you want to print out the record each time. And so as you iterate, you change which part of the record you're looking at. And so this would be some more dynamic code here, which we'll see in future lectures, that would be printing stuff out, right? And so now you're printing out a record or something like that. I can give you an example of a live version of that right now. Stone Cold Professor, and we're going to go to this one right here, the ice cream cone database. So if I say show the cones, this is being displayed using a loop. It's looping through the table, the database, and it's showing the sugar cone and then the waffle cone. So if we look at the actual database here, cone, don't worry about these commands if you don't know them, that's fine. But there, inside that database, that table, it's just showing those values. Or if I want to do from flavor, it's showing, that's what's in there. There's 31 different flavors in there, right? When I clicked on this show flavors button, it literally looped through that database, and with each iteration of the loop, it just added a new piece from the database. I don't want to show you the code because it's got the database code in it, and it's a little scary when you're not familiar with that yet. Okay, so I'm not going to bother showing you the code, but the line, it's literally that long. So up here on like line 6, I was connecting to the database with all that code that you'll learn later, and then here I'm using a loop to loop through each record, and it literally is just one line in a for loop. Maybe 2, right? It's not very big at all. Okay, so this is easy enough. I'll give you a little warning that your 5-minute website next time we meet is going to be to make a bullet point list using a loop. Okay, so it'll be like make 50 bullet points. It'll still be one line of code, right? All right, so this is pretty straightforward. We just have a simple for loop. It's going to loop this many times. But what I want to do here is I want to show you how this loop works, because a lot of people don't fully understand this. So what happens here, when line 7 gets hit for the first time, this part right here runs one time. That's it, just once. It never runs again unless you rerun line 7. That part only runs one time. Then immediately after that, it comes over here and it checks to see if x is less than 9. Well, at the moment, we know that x's value is 0. So is x less than 9? Yes. Okay, if it is, it does not go here. Okay, it does not go there. It goes to here. It runs whatever's in the curly braces, right? Once it runs what's in the curly braces, then it goes to here. And it increments x. So now it sets x equal to 1. Then it immediately goes from here to here and checks again, are you less than 9? If you are, come back down to here. So the loop part of this, and why it's called a loop, is happening right here. This part just loops over and over and over again. It goes from checking to see if it's less than 9, to running this line of code, to incrementing, to checking for 9, and running the code, incrementing, and it just keeps looping over and over again. Eventually, let's look at the place where x is equal to 8. We've gone through the loop that many times, and x is set to 8. And then, so it's still less than 9. It runs this code, then it increments. So now it sets x equal to 9, and then it checks here, are you less than 9? The answer is no. So it does not come down here. It goes from there all the way down to past the last curly brace and runs whatever's on line 11. That's how for loop works. Okay? Questions about that? Next up, the while loop. All right? While loops are pretty straightforward. We have the syntax is while some condition is true, do this. Now that's not real code, but that's what the idea is. While some condition is true, do that. Okay, so while x is less than 9. Now typically, if you know the number, you're gonna use a for loop, typically. But I'm just using this for a simple example here to show you, right? So we have to have an x variable in order to do this. X equals 9. This is one of the convenient things about a for loop. You put all this into one line, that first line, right? You put the declaration, the comparison, and the incrementation all in one line. Here you gotta do it all separately, okay? So here we're going to just say echo x, and we're going to put a line break between them. And this will get to your question, Jackson, about putting the incrementer before or after. Okay, we'll talk about that in just a second. So now I'm going to increment. So this is our whole loop. Again, there's a lot more use cases than this. This is just expose you to the basic syntax so you can get familiar with it, because we're going to be using these more and more moving forward. Right? So let's run this back to here. Here actually, and did I save it? I saved it. Oh, I started that. Look where I started my counter. What happened there was it started at 9, so it was already not less than 9, or it was greater than 9, so it didn't run. So that should be 0. Sorry about that, folks. There we go, 0 through 8. Now, what's happening here is you can do this a couple of ways. I can say this, echo x++ dot break. That'll actually work. Notice nothing changed, okay? What's happening here is it runs line 7, sets it to 0, then we get to the loop and it's checking to see if x is less than 9. It is. Then it says echo whatever x's value is and a line break, then increment. That's what line 10 is doing. If I did it the other way around, I'm saying increment x and then print out its value, right? So it reverses what's happening there. What do you expect the output to be? Yeah, 1 through 9. Now, how did we get a 9 in there? Okay, so here's what's happening in this scenario. We start off at 0. That line runs one time. And then it checks, all right, is it less than 9? Yes, it is. Immediately increment it. So before anything happens, x just became equal to 1. Immediately, right? Then print it, so it's going to print out on the screen whatever x's value is. Well, it's 1 at the moment, right? Then once it's over with, as soon as you get to the bottom, right before it gets that curly brace, it comes back up here, checks it again. Yeah, it's less than 9. Okay, now immediately increment it, so it sets it to 2, right? So it's going to keep doing that. Let's get to the point where it's sitting at 8, okay? So when it's sitting at 8, it checks, is it less than 8 or less than 9? Yes, it is. Okay, immediately increment it and then print it. Right? When we had the other way where the plus plus was on the other side, so in this scenario where the plus plus occurs afterwards, that runs once, sets it to 0. Fine. Is it less than 9? Yep. Keep going. Now it says echo whatever x is, so it echoes out the 0, then increment it. Now this is where it gets weird, because it's like, well, where's that break come in? Is it coming in after or before the increment? Doesn't matter, because it echoed out a 0, then it incremented, set its value to 1. Well, this has already been printed out. Now I'm saying, in addition, tack on a line break, right? But x's value is now at 1. So now we check it. Is it less than 9? Yes, it is. Go ahead and echo it out then, and so forth. So let's get down to the last of the loop. where we're at position 8. Is it less than 9? Yep. So go ahead and echo it out. So there, we'll call that the echo. And then increment it to 9. And so it's now sitting at 9, even though we've already echoed out the 8. Now echo out a break. So we put a break there. And then now, once you're done, you go back up and check, and it's now not less than 9, so it stops. That's why you only see the 8 there. All right, how do we feel about a while loop? Now this, normally you wouldn't just do counting, right? That's what the for loop's for. You wouldn't just say, oh, I'm just going to count from 0 to 10 or whatever. Normally this would be a situation where, for example, if you're reading a file, while I still haven't reached the end of the file, print this stuff out, which we'll learn to do that in a couple weeks. While there's still records in the database table, print this out. That's when you use a while loop, okay? How about a do while? Here's the syntax for that. Do this while something is true. Some condition is true. A very common use case for this is something like this. While, this is pseudocode here, user name does not equal the proper username, right? Whatever the username is supposed to be, then keep looping. It's going to keep asking you to enter it over and over until they get it right. That's a very common use case for that, okay? Does that make sense? And obviously that wouldn't be some scramble thing. It would be whatever the username is, Beavis. Well, username is not Beavis. And again, we'd have this little magical line here that would be getting the input from the user, which I'm not showing you how that works yet, okay? Questions about that? Some of this is kind of hard to show you a real use case without actually having the user input and all this stuff. And we will see that eventually, but I don't want to confuse you with so much PHP code. This is code that you should be familiar with the basic syntax already, either from your Java experience or particularly in this class from 1430, right, the JavaScript. But now you have a good foundation, right? We're going to use this stuff moving forward, and especially next week when we talk about arrays. So on my little list here, right here, we did the while, we did the do while, and we did the for. The for each we will look at next time, okay? So if I wanted to make a bullet point list that used a loop, and I wanted the bullet point list to be 50 or 100 or 200 or whatever, it's the same code. Just change the counter, right? So what would that look like? We're going to do a for loop. So let's start there, and we'll just go x is equal to 0, and we'll say x plus plus, sorry, x is less than 50, fine, and we'll go x plus plus. And then in here, what's our, let's say I want the bullet point list to say this is bullet number 1, this is bullet number 2, and so forth. What is this going to look like?
You probably want to start with 1 and counter them.
Okay, yeah, good point. We want to start with 1 instead of 0. I'd want to go from 1 to less than or equal to 50. That'll give me the numbers 1 through 50. Then what's my output going to look like? Good, close. There's one piece missing, but you're right. Not quite. Before that, the very first thing I should echo right here. Li, yeah. This is a bullet point. And then this is bullet number, and we can just dump the variable right in there because we're using double quotes. And then we want to close that out, Li. And that's almost it. There's one thing missing. UL. Yeah, we need the UL tag. Where do I put it? Before the for loop. Very good. All right, and then close the UL tag right there. So inside is that, right? That'll do it. So if we run this, we should get, there you go. Easy. You can make that as big as you want, right? Just change the variable, change the value, and now you got 500 of them. That's a lot of them. Okay? That's it. I mean, that's very simple. Now imagine trying to do that with HTML. You know, this is ridiculous. Yeah. Yeah, so that's a great question. What she's asking about here is, when we do the 5-minute websites, I always say things like, just make part of it HTML, I don't care what part is. So could we make this plain HTML right here? I always say make part of it PHP, and I don't care which part is PHP. So could this be plain HTML? And the answer is yes. The question is, how would you turn that to regular HTML? Yeah, we got to close the PHP right here, And then this is now, we're now in HTML mode right here, right? Yeah, right. So then we reopen the PHP there. This is fine because this is good to understand this. Then we close the PHP there and we get rid of that. And we now just have a regular old UL. And now that's just plain raw HTML, and this part is PHP inside, so I would definitely indent that to show that it's inside that UL there. And then of course, if this were really the case, we would have, and this was what we should have done all along, but I was trying to save time. But when you're doing your real web page, don't try to save time, do it correctly, right? But I'm going to put it all in. I want this all to be here. So this is how the code should look, right? And now this is 100% legitimate, valid HTML. And when we serve it up, let's refresh it, and we look at the actual code, there it is, perfect, valid HTML. No PHP, obviously, right? Right, so I think what you're asking is, even though we're using HTML everywhere, can we still see this? And yeah, because this is not HTML, this is PHP. That lines 12 through 17, that happens on the server. And the server literally converts it to that, right? So it's the same thing as if you just manually typed that, right? So the server converted that, and also the server converted this part to that. So you can either hand code it like that, or use PHP to do a little bit of work for you, right? That's really what PHP is all about, is to do that. Notice that the comments here don't show up either, because those are just for the PHP, coder, and so they're just there for you. They're not HTML comments. They're comments that vanished once the PHP was done running. But that's the whole idea, is to turn this whole thing right here gets turned into that. That's it. Any other questions about that? Does that make sense? We good? All right. Okay, folks, thanks for coming. We'll see you all Wednesday where we get into arrays, which is fun stuff.